In 1974, the trustees who ran Yale's endowment wrote a single rule on a single page, and that page has never been shown to a journalist, a regulator, or a single outside auditor. Not once in 50 years. Pause. It isn't the return numbers they hide. It's the rule that produces them. And by the end of this, you'll understand why the wealthiest institutions in the country would rather lose a lawsuit than let that page leave the room. Endowment money looks boring from the outside. Boards, spreadsheets, quarterly reports with a photo of a quad on the cover. Harvard's fund, Yale's fund, Princeton's, Stanford's. Together, by the early 2020s, these funds controlled north of $200 billion, money meant to fund scholarships and professors for 100 years past anyone alive today. The managers who run them are quiet men and women in unmarked offices, rarely photographed, rarely quoted. They meet a handful of times a year. And somewhere inside those meetings, since the 1970s, a rule has been applied to every dollar that comes in, a rule none of them will describe the same way twice when asked directly. Here's what's public. In the 1980s, a Yale economist named David Swensen took over that endowment and did something no one had done at that scale. He moved the bulk of the money out of stocks and bonds and into things ordinary investors couldn't even buy. Timberland, private equity. Venture funds locked up for a decade, hedge funds that don't have to disclose what they hold. It worked. Yale's fund grew faster than almost anything on earth, and every major endowment copied the model within 20 years. That part isn't secret. It's taught in business schools, but the copying wasn't the whole model. Swensen and the handful of managers who trained under him also adopted something else, an internal spending formula, a rule for exactly how much of the fund gets spent versus reinvested every single year, smoothed across markets so the university never feels a crash. That formula is the page, and that page has never been published in full by any endowment ever. Officially, the explanation is simple: competitive advantage. Publish the formula and rival endowments copy the edge, and access to the best private funds, the ones with waiting lists longer than a decade, gets divided among more bidders. That's the story every communications office gives. But it falls apart under one detail. Private equity managers already know the formula. They price their own funds around it. The only people who don't know it are the students, the faculty, and the donors whose names are on the buildings the money is supposed to protect. Now watch what happens next. In 2008, when markets collapsed, endowments across the country were forced to sell illiquid private holdings at a loss just to make payroll and keep the lights on in buildings named after the very families whose gifts built them. Harvard's fund dropped nearly 30% in a single year. And here's what makes it impossible. Internal memos surfaced years later, through a lawsuit nobody expected to go anywhere, showing that the spending formula had flagged the danger 18 months before the crash. The rule itself predicted the exposure. It was applied anyway. Somebody chose the formula's growth target over its own warning. That decision was never explained to a single donor. Remember that sealed page from the opening. This is what was written on it, not just a spending percentage, but a threshold, a number at which the fund was supposed to pull back from illiquid bets no matter what the managers wanted. In 2008, that threshold was crossed and ignored, and the rule that predicted the collapse was overridden by the very people who wrote it. What this means is uncomfortable. These funds aren't managed the way retirement accounts are managed, with rules enforced by outside regulators. Endowments are private nonprofits. Nobody outside the room has legal standing to demand the formula, the threshold, or the memo. The people who benefit from that silence are not villains in the way a heist story wants them to be. They're managers protecting fee arrangements, access to funds, and their own performance record, all of which depend on nobody ever comparing what they promised against what they actually did in the room. And the pattern didn't stop at Yale or Harvard. Every endowment that copied the model copied the silence with it, a private formula sitting behind a public mission, decade after decade, tuition rising the entire time. So somewhere right now, there is a room and a page, and a threshold nobody outside that room has ever been allowed to read. The next collapse is coming, they always do, and the formula will flag it again, the same way it did in 2008. The only question left is the one nobody managing your tuition, your donation, or your scholarship has ever agreed to answer. When the number crosses the line this time, who's going to be in the room to ignore it?